Generally speaking, like breathing exercises tend to be pretty cool. Whether or not they will help in that specific scenario, I don't know. Some people actually do really well with breathing exercises. Some people don't. Then we start to think about backing all the way back to the beginning of the conversation. And that brings me back to this automatism that we expect out of breathing. Is it possible that chronic hyperventilation due to mouth breathing or deviated septum can be a root cause for baroreceptor issue? And could COVID had make things worse? Would breathing retraining exercises help? When it comes to breathing, it should be automatic. It should be automatic when you're resting, when you're sleeping. It should be automatic when you're running. Changes, matches what you're doing. Most people, if you're sprinting down the street after the bus, you're not having to consciously think about your breathing, although you may be consciously aware of the fact that you're out of breath. Okay, so ideally, in the best ways, we want to have that breathing kind of just be regulating itself without any override. But that's the interesting thing about breathing, is that we have the ability to override it and manually breathe as well, which is a little bit different than what we would think about with like your heart. Like you can't like make your heart beat faster just by thinking about your heart beating faster. But you can make yourself breathe differently by focusing on what you're doing with your breathing. So like we can augment our own breathing. So I'm going to put those things in two separate camps, right? So I want to make that delineation. So if someone is mouth breathing, for example, the second question is, why are they mouth breathing? And it may be different for different people. It may be that it is a relationship with CO2 levels and we're getting inflammation in the nose because of the mouth breathing, and then it makes it harder to breathe. And then you kind of get this circular response where it's hard to breathe through my nose, so I breathe through my mouth, which further makes my nose more congested, right? And we've seen, I'm blanking on his name, the gentleman from, I think it's Ireland, who wrote the book on this, and they talk about closing your mouth and moving your head and doing these things. But what is interesting, I'm going to take a little bit of a side on that. Talk about the relationship between draining your head, being able to drain the venous system and the lymphatic system of your head, particularly the venous system, which is draining inside of your skull, as an understanding of things that can create more congestion within the system, whether that's in your ears or in your sinuses. So one of the things that we know is that if it gets occluded in the neck, it makes it hard to drain out. And one of the things that they pointed out as a movement of your head, that it helps be able to clear up breathing, may also be associated with the fact that we're moving our neck in a way that pumps and allows some of that blood flow to improve. So that's just like a little bit of an aside. Okay, I'll put that away. So let's just say we just have a hard time breathing. Deviated septum, I broke my nose playing football. It's hard for me to breathe through my nose. Maybe I got a narrow palate. It's small. I'm not breathing very well. It causes me to breathe through the mouth. It's not ideal. We know it changes a lot about the way those chemoreceptors work, not necessarily baroreceptors, but chemoreceptors, because we're not activating them through our nose. It has a lot to do with the jaw position, which, as you can see, can affect a lot of the pass-through materials that we have going through our neck. But as far as the direct baroreceptors themselves, it may not make a major difference unless we start seeing some big structural changes in the head and neck and face. But it can affect the chemoreception and the way that we augment the breathing frequency. Let me say that better. Changes our pattern of breathing in a way where it offsets our CO2 levels or our oxygen levels, and it makes it so that we can, our body has to respond to that. So baroreceptors themselves, maybe not. The retraining ideas are cool. Generally speaking, like breathing exercises tend to be pretty cool. Whether or not they will help in that specific scenario, I don't know. Some people actually do really well with breathing exercises. Some people don't. And then we start to think about backing all the way back to the beginning of the conversation. And that brings me back to this automatism that we expect out of breathing, meaning ideally we want our breathing to be able to be passive, where we don't really have to think about it that much. We're not having to catch our breath when we talk. We're not finding that we're just like getting ourselves dizzy with the way we breathe, and working toward understanding the next deeper level, which is how those pneumotactic centers work. Pneumotactic centers are basically the reflexogenic systems in the brainstem that monitor the chemoreceptors, which detect oxygen in the baroreceptors, CO2 kind of everywhere, the tension in the lungs, the pressure in the heart. And it takes all those things and it kind of samples all of it at once. And then it figures out what the rhythm of your breathing should be. So if it's getting too fast, it'll try to slow it down. If it's getting too deep, it'll try to speed it up. So we want all of that to kind of be automated. If we're finding that there's a big deviation from the automation, then that's where it makes sense to start pulling in and looking a little deeper at some of the interface between some nuclei within the brainstem, the nucleus, tractus, solitarius. How is that talking to the respiratory generators, the central pattern generators that would normally do that? And then I know I'm going a little long on this question, but then you also have to focus in on the volitional component, which comes to like, do I do okay if I'm resting? But then when I'm talking, I get out of breath and I find I'm like breathy at the end of my speech, and it puts me out of breath, and I'm, like having a hard time when I'm breathing, and I'm getting dizzy when I'm breathing. or talking, excuse me. So if that's happening where the speed or the cadence of that speech makes it difficult to be able to breathe, then we start to veer over and think about that kind of feathering in or the dovetailing of volitional commands in this as well. Okay. I know that was kind of a long one, and that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but everybody breathes. So ideally, we want to shoot for just normal reflexive breathing being kind of the gold standard. If we have to, we can try to overcome that. That's where taking deep breath and calming yourself and centering yourself, those things are super cool. But if you're finding you're having to commandeer things that should be automated, then that's actually kind of where we think more in that neurological pattern, or is there something in the metabolic system that's throwing off that CO2 ratio?